But we've got a good friend of mine, Darren Huckey, who is come on, and we're going to dive into Hanukkah. And again, I know many of you who follow Talking Stand Firm, you follow already some Hebrew roots and follow some some ministries along those lines. And so this isn't nothing new maybe to you, but to some of you it may be. You may be like me 20 years ago when I met Darren. Darren's a graphic design artist, one of the best I've seen. I met him through that, knew he was a believer. And then fairly soon after that, he released a book about I think it's called The Four Responsibilities. And I don't have my notes before me on this, but the four responsibilities of a disciple, yes, as he taps into just the Jewish roots of discipleship. Phenomenal book, phenomenal resource as we talk about making disciples and being a disciple, but looking at it from the point of view as it would have been understood in that first century. Phenomenal work. But I remember reading that, and Darren came out to my church locally and spoke, and I saw the value of that. Like historical background was the thoughts that I had in mind. And then soon after that, one of my good friends in college began meeting with Darren, who was doing a group at home, and they were celebrating some of the feast and those things. And I'm like, well, what's going on? This is sounding cultish, man. So, I'm talking to my friend, hey man, I think Darren's great, but you watch out what you're doing. But the Lord continued to work. And this past year, my family celebrated Hanukkah for the first time as a family. We had Darren come on and wrote an article that you'll find in the notes for our parent ministry, Stand Firm Kids, Stand Firm Parents. And we've got him on tab to write throughout this next year, introducing to parents these feasts. And so we want to talk more into that. And so that's my butchering of an introduction. But Darren Huckey is the director of a Messianic teaching ministry focused on discipleship from a biblically Hebraic perspective. Darren is an accomplished writer, teacher, and musician, and has been active in ministry and our religious leadership since 1994. He has served in various capacities such as worship leader, youth pastor, lay pastor, and has been studying Hebraic Jewish roots since 1998. He was ahead of the curve. Jewishness of Jesus has radically changed his life and understanding of Jesus called discipleship. His focus over the last several years has been connecting the church back to its Jewish roots, bringing insights into life teachings in the ministry of Jesus from Jewish sources. He has been the rabbi's assistant at Shalom Macon in Macon, Georgia since 2016. Darren, thanks for joining me.
Hey, my pleasure, buddy. Good to be online with you.
Yeah, so like mid-show, I don't know if you got it. I emailed you the link earlier today, and it just hit me. I don't know if that email is even active anymore. And so I stopped. So the first half of the show, we follow up from our teaching, and we've been doing this series, and we ended it last week, and we were just catching up with everyone, and so on that, and so in the middle of that, I'm just, oh man, I don't know if he got it. So I'm like, I know I can text it to you. So Darren, it is great to have this conversation.
Yes, sir. Good to be here. I'm excited. I really had wondered, and you and I have not really got to talk about the connection that was made a year or so ago, but I knew we had mutual friends. I knew I'd been to your congregations and spoke there and things like that. And I didn't know where the turn had happened. And so it's good to hear a little bit of that story.
Yeah. And I totally butchered the story, but no, I mean, that's for real. Now, and so I had you come out and speak, and you did a phenomenal job at my church. I loved your book. I mean, I read it just to review it. I mean, to check it out. But also, at the time I'm thinking, oh, this makes sense that you should, biblical background, context, that aspect is how I'm thinking. And then my good friend Jared became a part of your fellowship, and and he's sharing what he's learning, and I'm like, oh man, what has he got into? I trust Darren, but what has he got into? And then it was actually the prophetic circle, as understanding the prophetic significance of the feast is actually the blood moon craze a few years ago that kind of led me to study of that. But seeing how Jesus fulfilled these feasts, in a sense, the spring feast, and how that may be implications in the future to some degree, is what led me to that. And then it just more and more, it's like, wait a minute, the Lord created this stuff. This was, and that was my first question for you. And as I was writing out the question, I'm like, it answers itself. I mean, because
right.
we're talking about Hanukkah, and I think really the elephant in the room is why would Gentile Christians celebrate it? Why? And so I wrote down, why should they be concerned with the feast of the Lord? I'm like, oh, well, wait a minute, that answers it. It's the feast of the Lord.
Right.
But so let's say Old Testament feast, so you don't give the whole question away. But tell us. Why should Gentile Christians be concerned or involved in this?
So let me just break down the question for real quick for us. So why would we be concerned, first of all, with the feasts in what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures? Then we'll talk about Hanukkah. But the first of all is, as you said, as you're writing out your question, you said the feast of the Lord. Well, that's the answer. But the deeper question is, I think it goes back to the book and the teaching that I came to your church and taught, was that we are to be disciples of Yeshua, of Jesus of Nazareth, right? He is our Messiah. He's the King. He's the returning King. And our job is to be the best disciple we can be. And part of that is to do the things that he did and to live the life that he lived. And no, we're not supposed to pretend that we're Jewish. I'm not Jewish. You're not Jewish. But I move in circles that there are Jewish people, and I am very comfortable in a Jewish synagogue, and I'm as comfortable or more there than I am at church sometimes. But yet Yeshua, Jesus, is my master. He's my King. He's my Savior. He's my Lord. And for me, discipleship is about living a life that mimics our master, that mimics our rabbi. He was called rabbi throughout the what I like to call the apostolic scriptures, and his followers called him rabbi. And why shouldn't we? Why isn't he our rabbi? And so that's a big thing. And so to do the things that he did, to live the life, and I think a big part of this too is the festivals of the Lord are set up in such a way that they're cyclical. They come every year. Everybody can tell you when Christmas, when Easter is, when Thanksgiving is, and so forth like that. But how many people that actually follow Jesus can tell you when Passover is, when Pentecost is, when Yom Kippur is, when Tabernacles is, and so forth. I think that's a big component of it, because once we experience these festivals, once we actually do more than just read about them as an historic event of some sort, but we actually live them, then they come alive. And every year we're taught a new aspect of redemption. We're taught a new aspect of Yeshua and his character, and a new aspect of what the Father wants to do in and through each one of us. And so I think it's a learning experience. I think it's something that we can teach our children to pass on generations, that they can experience God's redemption through these events, every single event, festival throughout every year. I think it's wonderful. My family, my kids have grown up in it. They really don't know anything else, and they're excited every festival. They're super excited.
So you said you began in '98. Would be when you first began celebrating them as a family, or what's the story there with you?
So our story is pretty interesting, actually. So my wife and I got married in 1994, and we moved from the Fort Smith area in Arkansas to Conway, where my wife was finishing up getting her master's degree. And of course, we didn't have any children at that time, but we joined a non-denominational church, and we joined, I think in the fall or the summer probably, and spring rolls around, and they have something they call a Seder for Passover at this church. And we were like, that is really interesting. My wife, of course, she is much more in tune at times than I am. And so
that's true for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. she's all excited. She's, very, very excited, wants to know more and digging and stuff like that. And I'm just like, oh, this is interesting. That's about it. And but we celebrated it for 6 years in that church. Now, it's a little ironic that we celebrated it with yeast rolls and pork tenderloin, but the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
They cancel it out, yeah.
Right, but it was a start, and it spoke into our lives, and it created something in us that made us look for something more. It made us look back to the biblical text. It made us look back to the biblical history and who Yeshua was at that time. All we knew was Jesus, the traditional Jesus that we'd grown up knowing in the church. We didn't know that his Jewish side and all the things that came with it. And then excuse me, my wife and a friend of hers decided, for some reason, they looked up some stuff online. They wanted to visit a congregation that did more of this kind of stuff. And so they found a Messianic congregation in Memphis. And so they decided to attend, and they, lo and behold, they met on Saturdays. And so, hey, we can do this, and it won't conflict with our church schedule and everything. And so they took off one Saturday. She asked me if I wanted to go. I said, nah, no thanks. And so, and then
here, I've been giving you all the credit, but it was your wife all along, right?
That is right. And behind every good man is a wonderful woman. So, anyway, the Lord used that, in a nutshell, the Lord used that meeting, that service there, to speak deeply in her life. She came back excited, and I was not interested whatsoever in what she had to say. I wasn't interested in the things that she was trying to convince me of or present to me at the time. She brought back a book talking about, the Sabbath, the festivals, all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, I'm not going under the law,
Yeah.
And that was my response. And so my wife, in her infinite wisdom, said, I'm not going to push this. I'm going to just pray and see what the Lord does. And lo and behold, actually just a few months later, some events happened that we're still trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together here 20 plus years later. And but the Lord started speaking to me and revealing things to me. And once he did, I took off running. I haven't hardly touched the ground since. So,
yeah. I mean, just phenomenal. And it seems to be, I know many of the people that we come in contact with that are viewing right now, I mean, they have a journey of seeking the Lord, getting in the Word, reading. I mean, just simply reading the Word, and it ends up in this same path.
Right.
With that, and I didn't have your books before me. I do now. So I butchered it earlier. I got it pretty much right. The 4 Responsibilities of a Disciple. Yeah, I mean, I encourage people to check it out. A great read. I'm just seeing $3.99 at Kindle. Go get it now. I mean,
there you go.
Yeah. I remember reading. I mean, it was such an impact on me. So a few years ago, I was writing for. I won't throw anybody under the bus. But I was writing for. No, I'll throw everybody on the bus. The largest denomination in the world's number one, news site, and I covered this prophecy conference, and I just told what happened. I just said, these guys spoke. These are who they are. One of them had a book called "When a Jew Rules the World," and that's all I said. He's the author of this book, "When a Jew Rules the World." And they come back to me and they said, "Hey, Jay, we can't run this, man. It's so controversial." I'm like, "What? How is it controversial?" He said, "Well, for example, you said when a Jew rules the world." I'm like, yeah, Jesus. Yeah, I mean, and that's that is so. I think that understanding of, hey, Jesus was Jewish is missing. Much less so much with that. And so I love where you went and said, hey, to be a disciple is to do what the Lord did, and hey, he was Jewish. So along those lines, this help us understand a bit more. And you made a distinction there between Hanukkah and some other feasts, and we don't find specifically Old Testament laying out, what we know of Hanukkah today with the original feast. Does that make it any less significant in regards of the cycle and of the feast?
That's an interesting question. I would say yes and no to that question. Yes, in the simple fact that it is not something that God specifically commanded us to observe, but yet it serves the same purpose in the sense that it was established to remember God's deliverance of His people in a time where the entire nation of Israel could have easily been wiped off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And God's faithfulness is what brought them through. And it was His faithfulness was seen through the hands of men, righteous men, who relied upon God's faithfulness and His goodness and trusted in His everlasting love and His covenant with His people to get them through that. And so while it's not a biblically mandated festival, we do see that Yeshua, Jesus, most likely observed it, because really the only place that we see Hanukkah mentioned in the entire Bible is in the book of John.
Mm-hmm.
In the book of John, chapter 10, it says that Yeshua was in the temple during the Feast of Dedication. And that word dedication is simply our translation of the word, the Hebrew word Hanukkah, which means dedication. And so this Hanukkah is the Feast of Dedication, which is the reminder about what happened during the days of the Maccabees, about roughly 200 years prior to the time of Yeshua, where Antiochus IV ransacked the country, ravaged the people, forbid them from keeping God's commandments, God's laws, God's Torah, burned the Torah. Any person that circumcised their son, he would have the officers take their son and hang it around its mother's neck and let the baby die after they killed the mother. And so it was awful. You were forced to worship pagan gods, bow down to pagan gods. You were forced to eat pig's flesh, which the Torah strictly forbids Jews not to do, and all sorts of other things. Idols set up in the holy temple of the God of Israel, pigs offered up on the altar, and so forth. I mean, the holy place defiled, the holy of holies defiled. I mean, it was awful. And a group of a priestly family by the name of the Hasmoneans, who later became known as the Maccabees, which is the Hebrew word for hammer, because they hammered these Greek forces through guerrilla warfare. They rose up and said, "We're not going to do this. We are going to worship God. We're going to hold on to the covenant, and we're not going to bow down to your idols. We are not going to stand for this. And so we're going to rise up. We're going to rebel. We're going to throw a fit. And if God helps us, He helps us. But we're not going to stand for it. If we die, then we die. But we are going to honor God and not bow to idolatry." And so through a long series of events over several years, God held their hand high, and this small ragtag band of rebels basically were able to throw the mighty Greek, the Seleucid Empire. And it was an incredible story. If you like, if you and your kids like things like Lord of the Rings, read First Maccabees. It is phenomenal. Just the things that happen and the battles and stuff that God delivers them through. But Yeshua, knowing what had happened, knowing the significance of how important these people took the covenant and how they wanted to rededicate God's temple after it had been defiled. And this is what Hanukkah is all about, the rededication of the temple. A year later from when it was defiled, they set up these 8 days of dedication where they would spend each day to dedicate the altar specifically, but the whole temple itself back to the Lord. And so they commanded that, hey, let's remember this every year. Let's take 8 days to remember the 8 days that was originally established to rededicate the holy temple of God. And there's a legend that goes along with that Supposedly there was only one cruse of oil that was undefiled that they found, and it should have only lasted for 1 day. But lo and behold, there was a miracle, and it lasted 8 days. And the holy menorah in the temple was able to last 8 days when it should have only lasted one. And that's the connection there with the light and the oil and things like that. But Yeshua, that was his father's house. It was his father's house, and that's the importance of it. He considered it extremely important, and he chastised those who made little of it and abused it and belittled it and didn't take it seriously. And so for him, he traveled all the way from Nazareth all the way to Jerusalem, which is 2 or 3 day journey on foot, to be in his father's house during the time of Hanukkah, the feast or the festival of dedication, because of the significance that it represented. So I think it's very important for us as followers of Yeshua to somehow acknowledge, participate in, whatever this festival.
It's what he did, and I know, and I want to hear some more about how they would have celebrated possibly during that time. But I know many of those viewing out there follow our students of prophecy, and as you're sharing the background there of Hanukkah. Sorry, I took a lot of Hebrew, but I can't. Obviously, my grade reflects how I pronounce it. So, so as it goes back, and a lot of things triggered. I mean, from some who look at prophecy, they look as Antiquitas as the fourth there as the one Daniel talked about as that being the abomination of desolation. And if you see it still in the future, it was no doubt, it was definitely a very much along those lines, this pattern we're going to see. And so It should be triggering. I mean, as we're talking about rededicating the temple, as we look for a future millennial temple and those things, it being rededicated. And so it should be, just hearing the story should be triggering some things and seeing the significance. And really the reason I wanted to start, and I so appreciate you last year writing for our Stand Firm Kids side and trying to talk with parents about, because I think it's the ultimate, the Lord's Feast are the ultimate teaching tools for kids. I mean, it's a lot better than any of the curriculum anybody's out there writing. The Lord himself designed it, right? And but I wanted to start with Hanukkah because I feel like that's the most known, I guess, probably popular wise. But so take us back to you mentioned how that Jesus celebrated it. I mean, do we know much about how they would have celebrated it in that first century or in that time period?
So I don't know a whole lot. Now I've done a lot of research, but I don't know a whole lot about how they've celebrated in the first century. I do know a few things. One of the things I do know is there was a debate on how to light the candles. Okay. So today, just to let everyone know, today, the way that we light Hanukkah candles is we have a Hanukkah, which is a 9-branched menorah candelabra, right? And the reason why it's 9 branched instead of 8 branched, there's 8 nights of Hanukkah, right? So why is there 9 branches? Is because the 9th branch is for a specific candle called the shamash. The shamash is what's called the servant candle. The shamash is a servant, and it lights all of the candles for each night, okay? And so on night 1, instead of just having 1 candle burning, you actually have 2 because of the shamash. And this is something I sort of play up in my book, 8 Lights. I'm going to go ahead and show this, and you can talk about it later.
Yeah. No, we definitely want to get that out there.
Book, 8 Lights, a Hanukkah devotion for followers of Yeshua. This is every night I go through and some kind of theme talking about character development or something that in our lives that we can pattern our lives after Yeshua, his teachings, his disciples' teachings, their lives, and so forth. And on night 1, the theme it's called Avodah, and Avodah, and did I have the right page? Yes, Avodah is a Hebrew word that means service, and it's modeled after this candle called the shamash, because the shamash, nobody ever gets to talk about it. He doesn't get any credit for anything, he's just there to serve, and all these other candles get the credit. Candle 1 for night 1, candle 2 for night 2, and so forth. But the shamash is sort of in the shadows, so to speak. And that is a characteristic in our lives that needs to be reflected as well, that we need to serve willingly without having to get credit. We need to serve others without having to get the glory or be in the limelight and so forth. And this is the way Yeshua served and so forth. But in each night of Hanukkah today, we light an increasing number of candles. So we light the one candle plus a shamash on the first night, 2 on the second, 3 on the third, and so forth, all the way up to 8 nights. And on the 8th night, you have this blazing, candelabra with a total of 9 candles blazing. And so in the first century, there was a debate between the 2 schools of thought. And this is in the time, possibly right before Yeshua was born or right after he was born in that time period, between the schools of Hillel and Shammai. Now, Hillel and Shammai, you'll find lots of information about that in rabbinic literature and so forth. There's more actually debates between their students than there are of these teachers, but their schools are famous for these arguments of we're supposed to do things this way. No, we're supposed to do things this way. And one of the arguments during that time period was related to the Hanukkah menorah, which is called the Hanukkah. And the school of Shammai says we start on the first night, we light 8 candles. The second night, we light 7 candles. And we sort of count down, and it's a countdown. And the school of Hillel says, no, we start with 1 candle and 2 candles the second night, 3 candles and so forth. We increase the candles each night of the week. Why? Because the lesson is not to diminish our light. The lesson is to increase our light. We are to increase our, and the word is mitzvot, and in Hebrew, it literally means commandments, but it's in the sense of our acts of service, our good deeds, our fulfilling, the commandments and so forth. And so our light is supposed to continually shine brighter by how we live. And that reminds us of something Yeshua taught us, doesn't it? Back in Matthew chapter 5, he said, you are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Now, he doesn't say, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good theology, or that they may see your good hairdo, or your good, cool clothes, or your books that you've written or whatever. But he says your good deeds. And this is the light that we're supposed to be shining. And so this has always been a very core principle from my perspective on how we are to shine the light of Hanukkah. I think Yeshua, in his day, it probably would have been something very simple. It's probably not as big a deal as it is today in some circles, but a remembrance. That was the big thing. Lighting the candles, having the celebration for 8 days, and remembering the deliverance of the Lord and his hand at work in our lives. I think that was the big factor that was probably observed in his day.
I mean, just like I said, my family did it for the first time. That was our first time to. I mean, it's anything. It's been on my heart for a while, and it's just dragging my feet to do it. And we just pulled the trigger. We did it. Actually, we get the. I can't say the menorah thing, and that's my Hebrew menorah thing, and we get it, and we didn't get candles. I thought I had candles, so we had little bitty birthday candles, like squeezing in there, like silly putty out, making it work, but it was phenomenal. Just, to walk through a period of time, and we had got to experience tabernacles in a bit, before too, so we had that little introduction, but it was really a powerful time. With us, and I had your book, so 8 lights, and so we're going through it each night, and so working through it, trying to figure that out. So would you speak to us as, for most of us listening out here, we're Gentiles, but I think everybody sees, okay, this is something the Lord himself did. How do we go from not doing that to beginning to incorporate that in our family or in our lives? How would you suggest that?
So with anything, my wife and I have been through a lot over the last, we've been married 27 wonderful years, and we've been through a lot in our pursuit of the Lord. and our observance of the commandments and our lifestyle change and things like this. And for anybody out there starting on something new, I would advise taking baby steps, because you can easily, as with anything in life, you can easily just get overwhelmed and give up. And that's not the goal. The goal is for you to enjoy what you do, for it to be meaningful, and for it to bring joy and peace and life to you and to your family. And so I would advise starting somewhere slow. If it's just, hey, let's read a devotion tonight for the first night of Hanukkah, maybe next year we'll light candles. And then the following year, maybe we'll make some sufganiot. Okay, that's a big fancy Hebrew word that means jelly-filled donuts. Okay,
we bought them. We went we bought it, but the kids loved that part. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. One of the things that we haven't talked about is that one of the major themes of Hanukkah is also oil. So lots of fried food, not really great for you, but good for the atmosphere. So lights and oil, so I would advise just doing what you're comfortable with, doing what you can do, and not overwhelming yourself, not making it a burden, because these things are not meant to be burdensome. These things are to create life, and especially life in your family, and to bring memories and pass on value to your children and to their children's children. And so, start with something that you're going to enjoy. That's the big thing. And find something that's going to connect you with it and make it meaningful, and not just go through the motions. I think that's a huge step right there.
That's so good. I said it's such a great experience for our family. And then I didn't do well keeping it up. And so I'm taking your advice, just do something, just do a little bit with that. And maybe so if someone is that their kids are grown, I mean, still, wouldn't you encourage them still to check this out, to move in this direction?
For sure. I mean, my kids, like I said, my kids have grown up in this, but you know what? My kids are almost about to be out of the house. I've got one that's married, and I've got 3 others that are on their way, headed in that direction. I've got one that'll be with us for a little while longer. But we've already figured out, once our kids leave the nest, pardon, my phone is trying to dial on me, but once my kids are gone, this is something that's it's our identity. It's not something that we're doing specifically just for the kids, like a lot of families do, because this is about our relationship with the Lord, and it's something we want to pass on to our children. But it's definitely connected to our identity in our Messiah, and something that we it's just who we are. We're going to continue.
Well, we're going to have you come back and help us out on starting the next feast and the next series. I need the help. I want to be encouraged in it. But I mean, it was phenomenal. Our family, and then communicating that to our larger family was, really cool experience this past year. And I just encourage people to check that out. One simple thing that I've done is just put all the feast dates in my phone. And so I get alarms. I mean, some reason it goes off at midnight. I haven't figured, out that some crazy time at night. And but playing the alarm and just keeps it in the forefront, keeps it on your mind. And I just encourage now. And I think you pointed this to it. I've also seen folks who've stepped in and begin to embrace some of these things, end up off the deep end too, go too far. I mean, what kind of advice can you give us on just not going I've seen some who just have fully embraced Hebrew roots to the point that they no longer believe in Jesus. So, I mean, how would you encourage someone to pump the brakes at some point?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question, because not because I can't answer it, but because every person that unfortunately I've experienced many people in this because of where I'm connected. Yeah. But every person that falls along the wayside, according to Yeshua's parables, as you know, even in Yeshua's parable about the soils, there wasn't just one bad soil and one good soil. There were several bad soils and one good soil, right? And so with the same situation here, is that each person has their own reasoning for running down that path to destruction. And I can pinpoint them when I see them early on, usually. And I've tried to head off some, and I've been successful in some, but others I haven't. So, but the biggest thing is we have to keep our eyes on Yeshua. We have to make sure we understand the apostolic writings in their proper context. And when things get difficult, because our paradigm has changed, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I see so many people when they begin to understand a few things, they get frustrated because our traditional understanding of, for instance, Paul's teachings conflict with what they're learning. And so one of the first things that they start having a problem with is Paul and his writings, because they seem to contradict the rest of Scripture. And I have resources that I can help you in that to reconcile that. But if they're just different signs, we can see along the path. Unfortunately, we all have blind spots. And so I think one of the big things is accountability to others and keeping our eyes on Yeshua. I think those are the two big things.
That's such good stuff. And Darren, before you go, as we wind up here, I want to make sure that you get to tell us about your ministry, how to follow you and your books. We've mentioned the 4 responsibilities of a disciple, 8 lights. I encourage everybody to check that out, devotional book on Hanukkah. You also have your 5-minute Torah, which I think is incredible. I think a lot of people will be interested in that. So tell us about your ministry and how to keep up with you and what you've got.
Sure. 5-minute, Emet HaTorah is the name of my ministry. It means basically the truth of the Torah. And I actually helped found this ministry. Let's see, it's almost 20 years ago. I actually helped someone else begin this ministry as his ministry. And then it ended up being turned over to my hands back in 2013. And I've been running it ever since. And so, anyway, I really am focused on trying to bridge the gap between people who are seeking and the Scriptures from a Jewish perspective, and put Yeshua right smack dab in the center. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, as you've talked about, my book 4 responsibilities of a disciple is written from a perspective of, we have lots of books on how to make disciples, but I found out that most of those books are teaching people to do something and create something that they're not. Okay.
And
so my whole phrase is, one empty cup can't fill another. And so we have to become disciples in order to make disciples. And so that's the perspective this book comes from, is what does it take for me to truly know that I'm a disciple, to become a disciple, and what does that look like, And so that's the perspective of that book. And I've got several other resources. As you said, the 5-minute Torah, I've got 3 volumes of that. Here's volume 1, here's volume 2, and recently, just in the last month or 2, released volume 3. And these are devotionals / commentaries on the weekly Torah readings. And I go into the Hebrew, I go into the New Testament writings and connect passages, and I go into some of the Jewish writings and legends and different things like that, connecting all these pieces, basically doing a lot of research, a lot of work, so people don't have to, so they can read a Torah portion and get this really good nugget that they can chew on, and they can roll around and say, "Ooh, that was a really cool connection, and how can I apply it now to my life?" So that's the point of that. It's used a lot for family devotions around the table, or fellowships and things like that. As you said, 8 lights. I've got this. Hanukkah is coming up just in a few weeks, And I think it's critical that we have something to guide us through it. And this isn't just devotions. It tells you how to celebrate Hanukkah as well.
We used it as our manual. I'm like, hold it, lighting a candle, doing up. What do I say? I mean, totally. I mean, it was totally like terrible on my end, but again, it's special time. And we used your manual, and it's on Amazon. So even if you're catching this now, you've got time to get it in and get prepared. But if you have to order candles, do it ahead of time. That's what I ran into.
Exactly. And I'll also have this book called Cup of Redemption. It's a Passover Haggadah. It steps you through how to do a Passover Seder, and tells you all the different things that you need for that. Tells you how to do what steps, everything. Puts Yeshua right at the center. It's a great resource, especially if you've never done Passover before. And lastly, I have a prayer book called Tefillot Tamid. It's a prayer book taking the Jewish prayers and translating this, my fresh translation, into English, and introducing people to that if you're not familiar with that, if that's something you want to try to connect with. And it's just something that we try to do, is connect people with resources of how to make their lives Yeshua focused, with a connection to the faith that Yeshua had, which was based on the Torah, and understand him, his apostles in that light, and stay on the path.
Tremendous. Where can they find your ministry online?
Emet HaTorah.com. You can find all my books on Facebook. Find Facebook. You find 5 Minute Torah on Facebook. You can actually go and we have a 5 Minute Torah podcast. It's not being currently updated, but there's like 3 years worth of episodes that people can listen to.
Incredible. We'll have links to all of that wherever you're viewing this. If you're on YouTube, Facebook, whatever channel you're on. Darren, thank you for doing this. We're going to have to do this again. Coming up, enjoyed catching up. So Darren, if you can, hang on as I close this out. I want to talk to you as we close it out, but I want to send it off. Darren, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It's just tremendous to have that conversation with Darren. And I want to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being along the journey as we talked about marching on, and we celebrated that. Go out, check out Darren's resources. Just incredible. I encourage you, try this, implement it in your life. I love what he said. Take a baby step with that. Just start somewhere. I encourage you to do that. So, hey, we've got coming up. We won't be here. No Teaching Thursday night. No Stand Firm teaching, or Teaching Stand Firm. No Talking Stand Firm on Friday next week. It is Thanksgiving, so have a great Thanksgiving. Join us next Friday as we've got Chadwick Harvey talking about prophetic implications involving Hanukkah. We look forward to having you there. Hey, wherever you're viewing this, still go over to Stand Firm. Go over to our if you're on Facebook, go over to our Facebook page, Stand Firm. Go find us on YouTube. Like, subscribe. That helps us all out. Share. And again, remember, every Monday, I am just wanting to share my heart and pour into you. We would love for you to be a part of what we call Navigating Truths. And so you can find a link there in the notes wherever you're viewing this, and you can sign up and be a part of that. Thank you for being a part of Talking Stand Firm. We'll do this in a couple weeks.